In May this year, NDA government announced Aatmanirbhar package worth 20 lakh crore rupees. The main focus was on MSMEs, which contribute around 30% to the country's GDP. With big announcements came a message to make India self-reliant. On India Revival Mission this week on Times Network, we will find out if the announcements have actually helped MSMEs on the ground or not. I am Heena Gambhir, and joining me on the broadcast today is Umar Reddy, MD, Hitech Magnetics and Electronics Private Limited. She's also Chair MSME Karnataka FICCI. We have with us Ashok Sehgal, Co-Chairman, CII National MSME Council and Managing Director, Frontech Heat Shrink Products. We have Mr Gurucharan, author and former CEO, Procter & Gamble India. And we also have with us Mr Tushar Gupta, Senior Editor, Swarajya. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on the broadcast. Let me begin this discussion with you, Ms. Umar Reddy. Now, MSMEs were severely impacted like many other sectors in the country because of coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown that followed. Tell us, how has been your experience and the challenges that the sector, according to you, is still facing?
Thank you, Heena. Thank you for inviting us for this panel. Yes, what I bring and share here is my own experience as an MSME to this table. As an MSME, we must say that, the government's effort have been commendable in bringing about certain changes in terms of providing the fund for the enterprises to make use of, the Aatmanirbhar schemes that have come about, and the fact that the lockdown was lifted by May for us to again start operations. But the fact of the matter is that the lockdown has had its impact and the MSMEs are really, really struggling to grow. Now let's get back to just the figures. We all know that the micro, small and medium enterprises in the country, we have about 633 lakhs, which was 63 million enterprises, out of which the micro enterprises form 90% of this number, which is about 600 lakhs. We have about another 3 lakh enterprises in the small scale sector. And we have about another 50,000 in the medium scale sector. The numbers are, how do we then reach out and understand how this package utilization has happened with the micro and the small enterprises, which form the larger portion of the numbers, who really don't have access. So I'll just quickly touch upon 3 points, which I would say are important. One is access to markets. And that's most critical. Quite often people talk about access to finance, which is critical, but I think for MSMEs, access to markets is even more critical after the pandemic. The access to markets, can I go on? Yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so access to markets, especially after the pandemic, most of the enterprises, especially the manufacturing sector from which I come, the electronic sector, the ESDM sector, markets have shrunk. We really have about 30% to 40% of the business, and some even lesser depending on the kind of sector that they are in. And that has really impacted. But the other side of it is, we all know that, many of the companies who were earlier procuring from China are looking at India as a manufacturing base. But MSMEs being MSMEs are not able to find their way through to make this linkage with these enterprises which were earlier buying from China or who are also exploring buying from India. So, and they being small, they have various difficulties in running their enterprise, keeping their other resources intact. That to find space and time to look at this is an opportunity that is needed. So I think one recommendation would be an export information center or a portal where all MSMEs can access this information as what is required to indigenize or manufacture or an import substitution, so that they are able to contribute to the Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Okay. The second two I will quickly run through. The second one I would say is access to modern technology, and that's an area that I think we really need to, because with Industry 4.0, I think industries need to scale up, because obsolescence levels, especially in the ESDM sector, are very, very high. And we need, as MSMEs, need to embrace new technology, look at new R&D, And for that, they need the funding support and the wherewithal to be able to access this technology.
Okay,
and
stay on with us, Umar Reddy. Those are important points that you've raised, but I want to also now go across to Mr. Gurucharan Das. The biggest highlight of that 20 lakh crore package of the NDA government, Mr. Das, was the 3 lakh crore credit guarantee scheme for the MSMEs. But we've seen that not many takers are there. In fact, perhaps that's the reason why the ambit of the scheme had to be widened as well. What is your assessment?
We have seen in this COVID time that a lot of NGOs have come forward to the small enterprises to help people various ways. And NGOs are dependent. I mean, during this period, NGOs have done a wonderful job. But a lot of them get their funds from overseas. People abroad are big hearted and they give money to charity. And this to our NGOs, who in turn give them to the MSMEs. Now, this latest FCRA amendment law is actually going to harm the MSMEs because a lot of donors are getting so upset abroad. The red tape that has encompassed them. In fact, what we have done, catch one thief, we have imprisoned 99 honest donors. And the amendment rules are just, you know, it's horrendous. It's making India a laughing stock in the world. We've actually shot ourselves in the foot through this FCRA. So the government is not, one side is trying to do something good, the other side ends up doing something bad, which is, so to come back, I would say a lot of MSMEs' life and their success depends on an open market to not have the heavy hand of government. And there's a lot of progress that has been made in the ease of doing business, especially when things have gone online. So much has gone online and permissions have reduced. That's why India's ranking has gone up in the ease of doing business. But still, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of red tape. So my appeal to the government is to keep improving the ease of doing business. It's all well to have these financial packages, but ultimately free us from the license permit inspector Raj, which is still there and in many states. And you know, I give you a small example. In 2014, this government did a wonderful thing when it came to power. It declared self-assessment.
Yes.
And that self-assessment has made life so easy for the MSME, for the Indian citizen overall. Now, these are the kinds of actions that will help. They will help as much as the big reform. I mean, the agricultural reform that has been done in distribution will result in opportunities in building cold storages, cold chains in rural areas, and this will create opportunities for entrepreneurship for MSMEs. That's an excellent thing that has been done. So I would just say that aside from financing, look at holistically the life of a small enterprise. And the small enterprise still suffers from a lot of red tape.
Okay, very interesting. Interesting point of view there. Yes.
Okay.
Tushar Gupta, what is your assessment? Because here, of course, financial assistance is being given, which is being acknowledged as well, that financial help is being given. But what about the other issues, especially the ones that Mr. Gurucharan Das has listed just now?
See, I would respectfully disagree with Mr. Das here to boil down the requirements of the MSME sector to an FCRA regulation is somewhat wrong, but I look at the big picture here. what has the government done with respect to MSMEs? One, it has gone with the emergency credit line scheme that was there. But Heena, it's important to understand that that was only applicable to what 7-8% of the MSMEs in India, because you need to be registered for availing that credit. Now, it's easy to say that the government needs to come out and help this sector, but even the MSME owners need to come out and accept the formalization, which is not happening. We've seen various initiatives by the government where they want to encourage formalization of the MSMEs, but the MSME owners also need to come forward. But that's one thing, that's to do with the financing. Let's look at the farm reforms. Let's look at the labor reforms. All of these reforms are going to help MSMEs in the long run. Let's look at the production-linked incentive schemes in pharmaceuticals, in mobile phone manufacturing. So we have to look at the bigger picture. We cannot boil it down to one regulation. We need to look at the complete picture across India, because MSMEs are not just about one industry. They comprise of...
Just want to quickly intervene here. Apart from MCRA, he did mention about the issues like ease of doing business. There is red tapeism. So perhaps other aspects, according to him, are also something that the government can consider. What do you have to say about those?
Absolutely, he's not wrong on that, and that is why I'm saying the farm reforms that were just announced, the labor reforms that were just announced, the production-linked incentive schemes that were just announced. To give you an example, Micromax, just a couple of days ago, they said that the production-linked incentive scheme is going to help them. Now, to give you another example, when the tensions with China increased in June, we suddenly had a problem of active pharmaceutical ingredients, and that was where the boost for the local manufacturers came in. So yes, Mr. Das is right that there's a lot of red tapeism, there's a lot of interference for the government, but it seems that the COVID-19 pandemic and the tensions with China, all of them acted as a lesson for the government and they are working on it. So we need to look at those aspects also.
Okay. Mr. Ashok Sehgal, do you believe that the Indian MSMEs have actually converted this crisis, or have at least attempted to convert this crisis into an opportunity? Because I was just looking at some data. For example, in India, we never manufactured an N95 mask. We never manufactured a PPE kit. We did not really manufacture low-cost ventilators as such, but now we are exporting all of these things.
Yeah, I think that's very good to hear you say all those things, because I think this is very, very encouraging and descriptive of what is the strength of the MSME sector, not only India but globally. You can respond quickly and respond to challenges. And the other thing is that, at least in India, most MSMEs are strongly entrepreneurially driven. Now, they may have started with one product, but the entrepreneurial spirit means that you show us there is a demand and we will rise to fill that demand. So, as it was mentioned by Sudha, that there's a question of market access. Now, I think one of the things the government is doing strongly is identifying areas where, I don't like to say import substitution, I like to say where there's a domestic demand-supply gap, which is being filled by imports. That is an opportunity for Indian MSMEs in particular to look at that and say, here is a ready market segment I can enter. Can I compete here on quality and price? And I think these are two issues which the government is trying to highlight and make the data available. And one of the steps which has been taken in this is that in government tenders, forget the 200 crores, which is for large enterprises, limit for global tenders, but there is this classification in government procurement of class 1 and class 2 suppliers, where class 1 suppliers who have more than 50% domestic content will get a price preference and an opportunity to participate much more actively. So I think that is something which is going to help MSMEs revive the demand, because we've gone through the survival stage. Now to revive and grow, we need to have more market and more demand coming up, and that is an area of concern. And so I think there is an opportunity there, and MSMEs will rise to it. I think Mr. Gurucharan would like to comment that.
Okay, I think Mr. Gurucharan Das also wants to make a point. Yes, sir.
There's a lot of good. I'm delighted that with these latest reforms that the government has done, I think that's excellent. However, the one area where MSMEs can really benefit and is export. India needs to create jobs. And frankly, no country became prosperous in the world without export. And what I'm sorry to say is that this government is actually turning against export. You can't, it's very clear protectionism has grown, tariffs have risen, and what that does actually is it harms the exporter. It ultimately, the good jobs that we want to create in India will come through export. And I fear that unless we reverse this protectionism, we will not be able to become an exporting nation. And in fact, make in India should be make in India for the world. That is very important. And Aatmanirbhar should be interpreted as self-reliant, not not turning inside as self-sufficiency. And I'm just afraid that we are going back to the 1950s and 1960s when we were closing our economy to the world. And that's another piece of thing. That's something that the government can do to help the MSMEs.
Tushar Gupta, are we actually closing down? Because, you know, if you look at the exports data, our recent exports data are suggesting that our exports have actually gone up by 5% till September from April as compared to the same period last year.
See, I would disagree again with Mr. Das. See, we're not, Atmanirbharta is not protectionism. This is one thing the government has emphasized again and again. It's not about going protectionism. I'll give you another example. Let's talk about the mobile manufacturers that have been allowed under the production linked incentive scheme. The Samsung and Apple, they together constitute for 60% of the global mobile phone manufacturing revenue. And they are now manufacturing in India. Just this time last year, Apple was unsure of producing iPhone 11 in India, but now they are going to produce iPhone 11 in India. So Mr. Das's message that we need to export to the world, companies need to come in India and make for the world, that is already happening. But again, this is not something that will be fixed in one quarter or one financial year. It's a long-term process, and the government has taken all the right steps in that direction.
Okay.
Even if we talk about exports in the farm sector, the government has freed the farmers. It has liberalized the farmers across India who they want to deal with. Now, these are some very small examples where the government is setting the foundational work for exports to work. I've just given a very small example of Samsung and Apple. Tomorrow, you'll have a lot of innovations coming in with 5G. There'll be a lot of digital enablers in the business for MSMEs. So the exports will happen. The important thing is to set the foundation for that exports to happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Okay.
And that is the what the government has been doing post the pandemic, post the India-China
So you
tensions.
believe that steps are in the right direction, and in the future, definitely it's going to help the MSMEs in the country. I want to give the last word to Umar Reddy and to Ashok Sehgal, because these two panelists here on the show are representing the MSME sector for us. Umar Reddy, to you first, very quickly. You know, we're also seeing a situation wherein people are not getting their salaries. Many people have been laid off, and they also come from the MSME sector. I mean, that is also another side of the story of the MSMEs that needs to be highlighted.
Yes, actually, I must agree there, because as I said, only 10%, and somebody else also said that only 10% of these MSMEs are registered under Udyog Aadhar or Udyam Skills Scheme, which shows that 90% of them are not even in the bracket. So when the government came out with a package of even providing PF incentive to these micro and small enterprises, obviously only 10% of them could access, and out of them, how many of them who were under the 20 or who were PF registered could actually incentivize. So I just put up a message this morning in all my MSME groups, and I asked my MSME members, did you access any of these schemes? So the numbers are very small. I just got one response, 2 responses, which clearly shows that the 3 lakh crore fund that was available, which was again then limited to only 20% of the fund of the existing outstanding, was a very, very small limit to the many SMEs who are not even part of the formal sector who could actually access this fund. So
yes, that's very important, because the unorganized sector, the informal sector, which also has got MSMEs, what about them? Mr. Ashok Sehgal, your closing comments, and what is it that the government can really do to help them as well, as the government is considering probably another package to help the economy to boost demand?
Well, I think I would get back to what Mr. Gurucharan said. The government has to take away the heavy hand of government, which is stifling people from coming into the formal sector. There is this fear that if I get registered somewhere, I'll have a whole bunch of inspectors coming and filing in on me. Now, having said that, our own experience in Haryana as an SSI unit, I must say, is that over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of easing of Inspector Raj.
Okay.
In fact, about 6 months ago, I was asked by CII to comment on the changes we have seen and what is our recent experience with inspectors. My admin manager told me we haven't had an inspector visit us for the last 6 months. So I hope that's something good. We've had a lot of permissions coming in online. And I think the fear of the government has to go away. Partly, the people have to be educated that it's not the way it was earlier. And partly, there has to be a reform. The reform is there at the higher levels, but not necessarily at the lower working levels, especially in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Once that fear goes away and people realize the government is there to facilitate and not obstruct, I think that change in perception is very, very important. The government is taking the steps that has to percolate down both to the MSMEs and the people who are responsible for monitoring and inspecting what they're doing. And then you will have all the people coming into the formal sector, and all the steps can be much more effectively implemented.
All right. I think those were really interesting suggestions that you all gave. Apart from the kind of financial packages that we are seeing coming from the government to help the sector, there's also a need perhaps to boost the confidence of the entrepreneurs. Ease of doing business, as Mr. Gurucharan mentioned, is also something that the government still must focus on to help this sector emerge stronger. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on India Revival Mission.